Hey guys, it's Stuart once again, and I'm just here to share a little bit about neuro-linguistic programming, especially since many people have been requesting about it. And I figured that I'll spend whatever time I need in order to craft this out as best as I possibly can. So over the last, 20, 30 years or so, I've been experimenting with the use of mind technologies, psychology, all that kind of stuff. To me, nothing comes close to achieving fantastic goals than NLP. So neuro-linguistic programming, not natural language processing, NLP, is one of my favorite go-to tools because as a coach, as a person who does psychotherapy, I need to understand the maps of the model of people's world. So it's a very fascinating area. I hope that it'll give you a little bit of glimpse of what it can actually do in order to up your capacity. When I was 13 years old, I was sent to a program that helped me to study. It taught me strategies to be able to learn faster. And as a result of that program, I ended up jumping from second last position in class to first position in class in the span of just 1 month. Now, if that's not a belief breaker for you about what the mind can do, I don't know what is. So as an average student, someone who was very close to the normal academic stream back in, this Singapore stuff. For those of you who are listening from some other part of the world, my interest at that point of time was really getting good grades. And as a result-oriented individual, I kind of went after these good grades by learning a little bit about mental programming. I was visualizing stuff and it seemed to be good enough for me, but that was just the starting point or just tidbits really. So as I continued to progress through the years, I ended up utilizing neuro-linguistic programming in far more profound ways. Suffice to say, it was a really powerful personal mindset tool because I remember being on the verge of suicide a number of times in my earlier days. And it was one of those moments where, looking at a window looked really appealing to jump out of, simply because there were terrible events that happened in my life. But it's the irony of being able to know that is a choice, but it's not a really smart choice. Now, over the course of the years, I came to realize that indeed there are a lot of choices that we can make, but most of the choices are hidden within the inner black box of the mind. Like, for example, you can change the perspectives that you have in your head. I've had many opportunities to think about the way I perceive things and rethink it because there are better options moving forward. Neuro-linguistic programming really is about finding better choices, finding better ways of looking at the world, if you ask me. In addition, I think it's also important to make a mention that although there are 3 key areas, and I'll just briefly go through those 3 key areas in a short while, there are many things about neuro-linguistic programming that people do not understand or know because I've studied it and used it in my business for 29 years. So even before that, when I was doing my NLP Practitioner and Master Practitioner training, which predated the 29 years of experience and all this accelerated learning stuff that gave me a little bit of foundation and interest in psychology in the first place, that put me kind of on the map. Whenever people come to me with a problem, I don't look at it as a zero-sum game. I take a look at it and say, here's some of the things that could work. Here are some of the things that could help you to make a better choice. What would it be like? Would you want to have a serious commitment to work on this, or do you just want to brush it aside? So in my opinion, it was just simply a means to look at other people, especially people whom have experienced difficulties such as I did, whether it's death in the family, having depression, having anxiety, all the kind of bad stuff that life gives you so that you can grow stronger, right? No, that's not how they see it. They see it as a debilitating illness. They go to a psychiatrist, get themselves electrocuted with a fascinating strategy of electroconvulsive therapy, amongst other things, right? So I don't mean to be disrespectful to some of these traditional methods, but I just want to make sure that we are all on the same page because neuro-linguistic programming is about the neurology, but it's also as much about the linguistics as it is the neurology. Now imagine that linguistics becomes the lever, the button that you use to press, to pull, to shift other people's ways of thinking. Wouldn't that be interesting? Because at the end of the day, you know that the biggest issues happen within the mind, right? So when people are talking to themselves in a particular way or saying certain things out loud to other people, they leave patterns behind, isn't it? So those patterns of behavior can be mapped from the lingo, from the language. So there are many different elements which I'd like to introduce you to. It's fascinating to me. I love the area of NLP. I love the expansion of NLP as it goes along, because there's so many interesting things that are happening. The average person who doesn't even know the basis of NLP and wouldn't even study it, they wouldn't see the fascination in that. The only thing that I'm fascinated about is learning to grow my potential and make better choices. Now, how's that for a way of living, right? Increasing your choices. What if those choices come with difficult decisions you need to make? Wouldn't it be better to have a clearer mind to be able to deal with those things or not? So let's start talking about the 3 key areas. Number 1, personal mastery. So it's all about emotional regulation. You've heard a lot of all that on my channel already, but NLP takes it like one level higher. In my mind, there are tools such as submodalities. I can actually utilize submodalities, which is basically a term which we all call the currency of the mind. If I know how to adjust the way I see things, things which look brighter to me are probably a little bit more appealing to me, or at least a little bit more apparent or salient to me, right? Things that are darker are less so. Things which are bigger might actually be more compelling as well. Things which are smaller are things which I'll probably discard or glaze over. So the key is that in utilizing our mental blueprint, we can actually structure pictures in a certain way that enable us to see the world in a certain way. So some modalities are not just limited to the visual. There are also kinesthetic submodalities. So there are people who point upwards versus point downwards, and that makes a significant difference. Those who point upwards tend to be more visual in nature, and I can gather that from their behaviors and the way they speak. When they point downwards, they're typically kinesthetic in nature. They're accessing emotional states when they point to their body. This is known as body language. When you're pointing to certain parts of your body, you know, they do have a body language. So people who are talking about things like this, they're visualizing, right? They're in their head. When they're talking like this, they're kind of like talking to themselves. When they do this, they're kind of like listening. So all of these represent the 3 key modalities that we work with: the visual, auditory, kinesthetic. And under kinesthetic, we've got the olfactory and the gustatory, which has got to do with the sense of smell and taste. These are just like broad-based terms, but once you get down to listening to somebody, there are a lot of other skills, and that comes to the second pillar, which is interpersonal skills. The ability for you to observe other people, calibrate to them. The calibration process is so powerful. It's so important. It's primarily the only reason why you can actually hold a good conversation with someone, dig out the essential elements from within their mind in order to form a blueprint of their model of the world. So mental maps are crucial. I go in, I figure out what the submodalities are, but I also listen to their beliefs and values. I listen to the sense of identity. I utilize that as a means to uncover what's on their mind. And when I know what's on their mind, I can predict what they will do. And when I can predict what they'll do, I understand how this machinery called John or James or whomever is going to function in the world. Once I know that, it becomes easier for me to elicit alternative strategies so that they can have better choices. It's not very much of a mystery that we've got 4 key positions in perception. The first position, you're looking at me, that's called the first position. Looking out through your own eyes. There's a second position where you can imagine that you're like me, and that's the second position. In the third position, that will be the observer position, you also gain new perspectives, right? So what I like to say is that people tend to get stuck in their life because they have stuck perspectives. They're always in their own head. They don't know how to step into other people's shoes, especially people who are particularly beneficial for their current state of being. So if I stepped into my role models, I'm probably going to have more choice. If I stepped into people who keep telling me that I'm good for nothing, then I probably have less choice. So it's not a mystery. It just happens to be such a big field of study that enables me to deliberately change the choice by which I perceive the world. Who would have thought that when I see something that is unjust, I can tweak my mind to, rather than respond with anger, to respond with calmness and rationality. It seems like a throwaway line, but most people say like, go do it, just change. But if I told you to just change, be humorous, how would you be humorous? How specifically would you? And that comes into the third element, which is known as modeling mastery. Modeling is not just about the elicitation of models, it's also about the installation of models. And most people at the basic level, as far as I found, will find it difficult to install effectiveness in their minds for very long. So it does take a little bit of revision, it takes a little bit of consistency. Just like if you stop working out, then the effects of your muscle growth and your strength development are likely to fade away, especially after you have a very extended stoppage of your behaviors, right? So what we need to do is to be able to form a strategy that will enable you to learn and continue to grow over a period of time. So modeling mastery is so powerful, but it requires a few things. It requires a little bit of understanding that, yes, certain things can be tedious to learn. Like, for example, not everybody is interested to learn about grammar, right? But in neuro-linguistic programming, because it's linguistic in nature, you need to understand the psychological basis of all of that, and turn yourself into a linguist rather than just a psychologist. In my mind, the ability for a psychologist to understand linguistics is limited, but the ability for a linguist to study psychology is unlimited. At least that's in my own personal experience. So one of my go-to approaches is to study the key language patterns, the Milton model, which is about the hypnotic language patterns of Milton Erickson, where Richard Bandler and John Grinder actually went out to model Milton Erickson in the first place, who was at that point of time one of the foremost practitioners of hypnosis, medical hypnosis, clinical hypnosis. So it created a language that we can utilize in order to put people into deep states of trance without necessarily even trying very hard. All we need to do is state control, which is, like I said, part one, the ability for you to change your own mental states, to shift your emotional states, similar to what cognitive behavioral therapy does, but it's different. It doesn't come from the standpoint of, here is a cognitive model, I will change your cognitions. No, it comes from a linguistic model. I change my language inside my mind, and it changes your cognitions because we're having this conversation, right? So these three things, the personal mastery elements, the interpersonal communication skills elements, and the modeling mastery elements, all are intertwined. I never stop modeling. I don't think it's possible to stop modeling. When you see people crossing the road without using traffic light, you're modeling something. Whenever you see someone who's in a leadership position, who takes on a role as an advisor to you, and he gives you some advice but doesn't follow it himself, that's modeling, right? So when we learn these things, we need to understand the fact that the world is our laboratory. Every time you communicate with people, every time you converse, you're wondering what exactly happened. But you need a community to be able to develop that. And unfortunately, that community is sorely missing. So I've developed with my group of practitioners, online, offline kind of approaches. Richard doesn't really like people doing online training, which I totally agree. I don't think it's the best, but you got to understand that there's some people who just don't have access, right? They won't have the ability to get out of their house or their home, or during pandemic, for example, it was impossible to do any kind of training. So we had to do some kinds of NLP development utilizing the internet. So things like submodalities can literally be demonstrated like this. You see, when I'm moving my head and I'm demonstrating spatial anchors, I can utilize the space and the gestures that I have in order to create a connection between your feelings and the way I am actually instructing you. I don't know about the other NLP trainers out there, but I had a ball of a time because I could put people into a trance on camera, which was fantastic. I can do this anywhere in the world. What a concept. That was fantastic. Yes, calibration is limited to the upper body, but surely we are not so limited, right? I mean, I could detect other patterns from you. I could detect facial expressions, color of your face. Well, of course, provided everybody has got a 4K camera like this one, but most people don't. So it becomes an exercise in flexibility too. So if I don't have enough, I can get calibration by extracting information from the client to let them know, or let them share with me what they know inside their mind. I'll have a conversation. I'll be a bit more explicit. So I don't think that being on camera is the worst kind of training or coaching modality. I think I love the intimacy with a one-on-one conversation like this. It's just that there are a lot of things that could happen, like how am I working my legs? What's my posture like? You can't quite see that because I'm not dimensional in the sense that you can see my entire posture. So calibration as a skill set goes way at the top of my list these days, because I'm realizing what a lot of people are not seeing. And when they miss out that information, they miss an opportunity to connect with people and to work with them. And likewise, calibration happens at so many levels. Levels of behavior, okay, what you're doing. Levels of capability, how you demonstrate you being able to move from one point to another in terms of an achievement of an outcome that tells me about your competencies. Even the way you breathe and the way you connect with those competencies is a layer of calibration for me. I'm fascinated. I get to know that, oh, you operate in this particular fashion, and I can predict that if this happens to you again, you're going to do that. So over the course of time, by understanding this and taking this to the next level, it allows me to become sharper and more unconscious about my skill sets. But, when you're doing an NLP practitioner certification program, that's not going to happen. You're going to be sitting there and you're going to be bewildered if you're not in the right state. You got to be in the right state of fun, enjoyment, really just immersing yourself and letting go of all that judgment. 5 times out of 10, I notice people who are kind of like distracted. They've got their own thing to do and they're not concentrating on the thing at hand. They don't have the mind space to really unconsciously absorb everything in the best light. And as a result, what happens is that when the light gets filtered through, whatever I'm saying gets filtered through those lenses, you don't quite learn. You learn what you are going through, right? So if you're busy, don't take an NLP training program because you're going to color NLP with your own busyness and your own way of living. That's not the way to do it. You come in order to unlock who you have always been, but have been slimed by the unnecessary problems in society, right? Unnecessary ways of thinking, unnecessary modeling. So a lot of us, we end up modeling mediocrity. That's where you're going to stay. In order for you to elevate yourself to the next higher level, let's just say that higher goals need to be set. And this requires you to even understand the anatomy of what an outcome actually looks like. Can you see it? Can you hear it? Can you feel it? That's known as well-formed outcomes. Very fascinating stuff, such that when I set an outcome, it becomes clearer and clearer to me as I take action. A lot of people have this misunderstanding that having a well-formed outcome means that you will achieve everything that you set for yourself. Well, not necessarily. Life is not so predictable, and to be honest, if you could set a goal and achieve everything at first glance, you'd be God. I mean, at the end of the day, I've made decisions. I wanted to put together an event, get people together and so on, but I've never had the opportunity to just do it seamlessly, right? What I have been able to do is struggle toward it, right? So I try something, certain things don't go along the way, but across my planning, I've got contingencies, I try new strategies of marketing, things like that. And eventually I plod along. I may or may not hit my target, but because of that process of going through it, I get more and more experienced in achieving the goals that I have. And the more I do it, the better I just become. So what this means is that over a course of time, what must happen is the ability for me to frame my way of thinking in such a way that it enriches me and it becomes far more powerful for me as a resource. Now, speaking of resources, a lot of people think that resources are like, oh, this cup or this phone or this computer or this camera. It's not about the physical, tangible things anymore. Resources are intangible. They're all in your mind, literally. Your imagination, if I asked you to imagine a lemon in your mouth and you're sucking on it, you're going to generate more saliva no matter what you do. Of course, if you didn't believe me, that's a completely different thing altogether, and chances are your physiology wouldn't respond in accordance to my language. Now, isn't it interesting then? My language can influence your physiology. I'm not even touching you, right? So if that's the case, then there must be some level or some logic in the use of language as a persuasive tool on one hand, but as a tool for transformation and change on the other hand. That's where leadership is. Salesmanship is in persuasion and influence, right? Marketing is in salesmanship and influence. And I classify that as one core component, of course. You can study NLP communication patterns and apply that directly into your sales, marketing, digital marketing vernacular. But at the same time, it's about the language of human beings. You're attempting to get to understand a person. You're attempting to work through what they think as limitations. But do you really know what they're limited by? That's what the meta model is all about. You want to be able to look at the structure of a person's thinking, their beliefs, their past experiences, the experience of someone speaking similarly to you in their channel in terms of their primary modality. Are they more visually inclined? Or are they more auditorily inclined? Do they need to stand up? Do they need to gesture? Things like that. So when you notice this ability for us to observe what's going on inside them, it forms up a better way of communicating. Now, of course, when you take a look at the entire spectrum of conversations, it also means your ability to deliver feedback. How about setting expectations as a manager? How about healing people, from conflict and helping them to see a different viewpoint? You don't really know what they're talking about. In my classes, I often use the phrase, the cat jumped off the table. Do you really know what that means. Inside your mind, you have an idea, but nobody really knows where the semantic richness, the presuppositions in the deep structure of language really are. So what color is the cat? How many legs it has? Was it blind or not? Was it bleeding? Did it have long fur or short fur? Did it even have a tail? Was one of their ears crimped? Things like that, right? Nobody really knows that, but we think we know, we assume we know. So no wonder a lot of communication is lost in the details. Now, don't get me wrong, I lose the details as well a lot of the time, largely because the way life is and the way language is pretty much like that. The problem is less the ability for us to identify all those details, but to know when to identify those details when they matter. That's why, when do they matter? I can calibrate to that. When can I exhibit my neuro-linguistic programming skills? Well, when I'm prepared for it, right? So whenever a client or a coach actually comes up to me and says, hey, I want to improve my capabilities, I want to improve my life, that is where I can turn on all of my capabilities in neuro-linguistic programming. I mean, if I'm on the street, I wouldn't be sitting down and NLPing people, Anyway, they're not paying me that much in the first place. So one of the key things that's necessary for individuals to grow is to have a concerted long-term plan. Yes, you can have an 8-day training program or a 12-day training program. I personally run 8-day programs because they're really intense and I go through cycles of installation, right? During my programs, I'm not going to be giving you a lot of conscious work to do. I'm going to be giving you a lot of unconscious work to do. I'm going to be telling you stories. Why? Well, if you really want to find out, go attend Dr. Richard Badler's Charisma Enhancement Training in Florida whenever he runs it. Go to purenlp.com and check it out. In my opinion, I think it's crucial to tell stories because they give multi-layered communication. And if the story is wholesome, you learn wholesome things. If the story is limiting, you learn limiting things. And sometimes they're necessary for whatever reason. I can teach you a limit and then I'll show you how to break through it just through the storytelling process, because it is vicarious experience. It helps you to develop self-efficacy and it actually helps you to grow, because we're only human to live in our own lifetime, right? Wouldn't it be great to be able to absorb the lessons from other people and their lifetimes as well? Well, that's called modeling, right? So through the process of modeling, I study other people's stories. I study other people's ways of thinking about the world. And then I ask myself, hey, what if I were to be able to do that as well? To become a wizard in, let's say, marketing, to be a wizard in copywriting. Yeah, I know there are a lot of people who have this fear of uncertainty and imposter syndrome. But look, man, if you are constantly struggling with being so serious and being so caught up with the fears of doing the things wrongly, then you've missed the spirit of NLP. NLP is in the spirit of the attitude of curiosity. And of course, we gotta have fun. NLP also stands for Now Let's Play. So when you are playing, when you're doing things in a manner that is play, you bring up the experience of being like children. And, being like children, you absorb stuff like a sponge. It's fascinating. So to me, the ability for us to do all this is through what I classify as a mastery triangle. I've talked about the mastery triangle before. You can click on this link. But in a nutshell, it really is about language, what you say inside your head, also known as your value system and your beliefs, because they function as linguistic elements inside of your mind, aside from all your presuppositions and assumptions that go on cognitively as well. Then it's about repetition. So if you keep repeating exercises over and over and over again, I've had the benefit of teaching hundreds or thousands of people different techniques in neuro-linguistic programming, and it helps me to explain it better and refine my explanations and my examples so that people can actually pick it up. And as a result of doing that, I become so much better. Wouldn't you want to become as good as me? I mean, you can't probably do that in such a short span of time. I've had distinctions created across 29 years of my experience, and maybe even more if you classify my early childhood. All of this can be learned. You have to remember that I'm now on camera. I'm speaking ad-lib. This was not me when I was 13 years old. I couldn't even open my mouth when I was in primary school to read a story. So because of this, I have grown in my confidence, my abilities, my competence in being able to share information and tell stories. I remember the first time I encountered Dr. Bandler was 1997. We were at the Black Bear Resort and Casino. It was on Indian reservation in Minnesota. And I remember seeing him in action for the first time. Fascinating I love the smoothness. I was simply just immersing myself in that role model, and that's exactly what I ended up being. Constantly, 2005, 2017, I went back to observe how he did what he did, and I realized that it is a logical pattern. It is a way by which, if you continue to immerse yourself in NLP, over the years you'll end up like Dr. Bandler. And in my opinion, it serves me, and if it serves my memory right, the ability for my NLP practitioners, especially my better NLP practitioners, to get to a higher level of performance is because they attended the NLP practitioner again and again and again and again. My master practitioners, the same thing. They went through the master practitioner multiple times, and they have this way of thinking about things that elevates them to a certain status and a certain level of thinking. So I definitely want to encourage people to go through more of this. And if you get stymied by the idea that, mindset is just a thought pattern, well, let's just put it this way. You can think that programming, a software, for example, is just about filling in some code. Yeah, that's true. But can you just use that statement and craft an entire code? You can't do that right now, right? So you need to be able to get into the nuances and the practical elements in order to say, okay, this kind of code works, this kind of code doesn't work. Why? Neuro-linguistic programming is exactly like that. So many people who have ripped me off through the years, they've taken a look at my material, they thought it's good, especially off YouTube. They've put it on some website to monetize. The way they teach it, though, is not likely to be able to engender a higher level of practice if you're not within the right kind of community that practice it with the right kind of attitude. So what I can say is that you should rip off, like this video, you should rip it off. It's so powerful to be able to study whatever it is that there is out there. I've talked about the meta model, which is really getting concrete, asking good questions, asking questions where it can match up with your mental model of the world so that you can eventually piece the things together. You are like, whenever I'm speaking, I'm sharing pieces of a jigsaw puzzle to you across time. Whereas in my head, I can think instantaneously across all elements inside my mental model of the world. So in order for you to get me, you need to wait over a period of time in order to get me. We don't have a USB connection. It's not like, I'm going to take one of these things and attach it to my head. I can't. Maybe down the line when Elon eventually has that brain chip installed inside our brains, and then we can upload our thoughts and you can get what I'm thinking instantaneously, right? But that's a really long way away. In the meanwhile, people are suffering because of poor conflict resolution skills. They are suffering because of lousy leadership communication skills. Couple communication skills are at an all-time low, and nobody teaches this in school. What a concept. Would you have thought that all of these things ought to be taught in schools rather than your, times tables and your formulas and stuff like that? Much of that has to be learned at a level where we suddenly realize why it's so important. So top salespeople come to me because they want to become even higher. They want to get to that level where achievement and success is not a fantasy anymore. They elevate their belief to their level of expectation. So I have such a high respect for people who are willing to go through the grind, because I went through the grind. I mean, I remember afternoons where Richard would send us away, right? Okay, go have your milk and cookies, but come back with 100 language patterns for each of the various Milton language patterns, and we would sit down and we'll write, and I remember getting I wrote so much that I had a blister on my finger, right? And that was just part of the journey. Is like wax on, wax off, if you understand the Karate Kid analogy. It's the basic stuff. Once you got the basic stuff, you can forget about it. Once you've forgotten about it, your unconscious mind will kick in. And when your unconscious mind kicks in, the world is your oyster. I mean, the universe is going to be your oyster. All you do is you speak, you command attention, and you allow people to shift in your tonality as you bring them into a deeper state of relaxation if you wanted to. So shifting tonality, it's another skill set that I happen to chance upon. I happen to have had great experiences passed down by my dad. My dad went to attend Train the Trainer as well in 98, and he passed on. But in the interim, he was very fascinated by the mind, how we learn. And he never had a chance to learn that until neuro-linguistic programming came into the fore. So as a person who's a philosopher, who was a singer, he downloaded very good vocal variety techniques that I utilize even till today as a result of learning NLP and cross-pollinating it, right? So I've got my own experiences that allow for a fascinating world of personal growth, communication mastery, and you've got to understand every single skill set that's available in my repertoire, I utilize them across different things. I mean, I didn't understand self-taught psychology in the past until I started to study it barely a few months ago. But I learned fast because I keep doing this. I keep stretching my limits. And the only way to stretch my limits is to have the right kinds of resources and to have the right kinds of choices that can expand my limits, right? So they talk about stretching beyond the comfort zone. Yes, stretch as far as you need to. I'm not going to go crazy. I mean, I want to do crazy stuff, but I know some of my limitations, so I'm going to stretch insofar as my assumptions can be challenged. So do I have to run a marathon to stretch my limits? Well, maybe I do. I just have to get myself into that mode to be able to manage it, but if it's a worthwhile goal. One of my questions is, how do I reach out to as many people as I can on YouTube? And that's a challenge that I've set for myself. It's driving me nuts sometimes, but at the same time, it's also one of those things that is a stretch goal and I'm aiming for it nonetheless. Will people want to listen to this? I don't know. So leave your comments down below if you're interested to learn more about the technical details of neuro-linguistic programming. I'll try. This one-way communication is really not the best way to do it. I can't give you immediate feedback. Your development of your NLP skill sets will definitely be much slower. But, if you keep me on replay like 20 times a day, maybe you'll get some unconscious benefit of that. So here's the thing that I usually see in neuro-linguistic programming. People's mindsets change because they start believing better things, right? Better things such as our communication is the meaning of our response, right? So if your communication got you a certain kind of response, that's the meaning of your communication. Meaning of your communication is the response you get. Every behavior has a positive intention, regardless of what the behavior was. So it helps me to have a positive intent or at least bear in mind the positive intent that someone who has made me angry and forced me to have to think about the way I'm responding to this person because I'm not paying attention to that positive intent anymore. Likewise, as I extend myself beyond a certain way of thinking, I'm challenging my own limitations, right? Because, I can't do this. It's impossible for me to do this. Language patterns in neuro-linguistic programming clearly state that there's some things called counterexamples. I can't tell him the truth. What might happen if you did? All of these things are part and parcel of the meta model, where we ask questions surrounding the three core filters we have in our minds: deletion, distortion, and generalization. And this model of the world is important to explore because once I know this, as I mentioned, then I can predict how you'll behave. And because human beings tend to be relatively fixed in our way of thinking, it means that we can celebrate strengths and we can move forward in a direction that is compatible, right? I find that the hypnotic patterns of Milton Erickson are fascinating. I know that Ericksonian hypnosis suffered a lot because it required hours, thousands of hours to develop competency in the past. But now with NLP, I can actually teach people basic Ericksonian hypnosis in barely half a day. Of course, yes, they need practice, and they need to practice with one another and anyone else who's around. But the truth of the matter is, and the capacity for proficiency increases with the level of experience that the trainer has. So you would expect a premium. So I'm somebody who will deliver on certain kinds of trainings I wouldn't like to benchmark because, as far as I'm concerned, I'm the cheapest out there in the world, right? Because you come to me relative to some other people who have to bounce through and struggle through some of the learnings. The way by which I teach and share information is completely different. I go through different layers of training the way Richard taught me. So that's been fascinating, and I've seen the potential and I've noticed how other people are mastering it over the course of time. So if you want to find out how you can become an NLP practitioner, well, you can stay tuned, wait for my videos, and just let me share some stories and unconsciously install them in you. Or you can come for serious training. And if you'd like to find out a little bit more, all you need to do is get on my mailing list or to contact me and have a conversation surrounding it. Just go to stuarttan.com and you will be able to get information related to NLP anytime. So most people think that NLP is about motivation. It is not about motivation. Don't get yourself mixed up with that. It can be about motivation, because NLP and motivation is like, there is a relationship, but it's like that tiny, right? NLP is about modeling what is working. So if I find somebody who is a great chef, I can model that chef. If I have someone who's great at hypnosis, I can model that person. So I can elicit that person's strategy and install it inside my head and turn that into unconscious behaviors right now. Where do you think these speaking skills came from? They came from previously 400, 500 different role models of public speaking that I modeled after in the Toastmasters. What to do, what not to do, what silly things to avoid, and so on. It's fascinating. Leadership, you couldn't imagine me being a leadership consultant, especially when I don't have a large number of staff. How in the world did I learn this leadership from? Well, it came from modeling the leaders in the armed forces, in large organizations, interacting with managers, and observing their mental model of the world. So through this approach, I've learned that NLP is more expansive than people can give credit for, because they just don't understand. They stop at a practitioner level, they don't get to a level of mastery, and then they try to make objective comments about what they know about neuro-linguistic programming. It's just not going to work, especially if you are learning from somebody who's not properly licensed by Dr. Richard Bandler. It gets into a little bit of fuzziness there, right? So in order to get absolute clarity, I'd highly recommend that you work with people who have been highly experienced, who have been pushing the limits of development of NLP, so that, you have a more wholesome approach to thinking. I mean, take a look at this, right? I don't know whether you can actually see this, but this is an aquamarine crystal. Yeah, hopefully you guys can see it. This, it looks a little bit darker than it actually is. It's a beautiful rubellite tourmaline, right? So it's one of the most expensive pieces I have myself. So in studying gemology, all of a sudden I realized that there were patterns in exploration so that I don't get cheated. And I collect gemstones just for fun. Here's a piece of, there's a jade cabochon here, and another citrine piece. There's another topaz piece. There's a root beer kind of color. So I collect these things because I find some aesthetics in it. I find some aesthetic value, but you might find it a little bit odd that I utilize some kind of neuro-linguistic programming to model the processes here. But it shouldn't be a surprise to you that business is filled with processes. And that's what I thrive in. If you work with me as a business coach, I provide and I develop processes as long as you understand how those processes are being developed yourself. So in neuro-linguistic programming, it takes things to a completely different level. You learn to sharpen your thinking far better than utilizing any other tool that I know of in psychology for this moment. So that's one of the things I wanted to share. It's taken quite a long time for me to be able to articulate this in this way. There are so many other strategies like chunking. How do you get to different levels of abstraction and detail in your conversation so that you can influence people who tend to either be abstract or to be more detailed and expect practical elements of any conversation in the first place. Anchoring, the ability to establish anchors, like a kinesthetic anchor, an auditory anchor, or a visual anchor, a spatial anchor, to be able to revitalize yourself in certain inner resources. How about the ability to generate more energy? Where does that come from? That's a model in and of itself, to be able to step into modes of yourself that are purely imaginary but also function, similar like the lemon experiment I got you to do earlier on. It's just like that. You just put yourself into a powerful frame, but you need to be able to do it deliberately and with great intention, because trust me, you're already doing this, but you're utilizing your powerful imagination to get you down, to get you depressed, to get you anxious, to cause you to fumble and fail. All of those things are just done in reverse of what NLP expects you to do. And if you knew the power that you actually had, then you have the choice. You have the choice to look at a terrible situation in a fantastic way. You can take a look at near bankruptcy and use it as fuel. But how do you actually turn that on? It's not just like the wave of a hand. You couldn't just possibly do that. It's a very concerted process of you going into your training, knowing what exactly to do so that you can engender a better choice as you're moving forward, simply because you know those protocols, you know those processes, you know how to apply them and when to apply them, most importantly. So if you're interested in neuro-linguistic programming, then stay on this channel. I'm going to be spending a lot more time talking about this so that more people can learn about it, and hopefully one of these days you'll come over, take up a proper certification program, learn how to become a coach, elevate yourself to the next level, and then you'll be part of this community that can actually transform the world in fantastic ways. Utilize that and become awesome in your own business, in your own career, wherever it is that you go. Become a mentor through the years. You can become someone who's senior and advise others through the journey, because at the end of the day, that's also going to help you to sharpen yourself at different stages of growth. My grandfather suffered from dementia. He was, he suffered very badly. I remember that as a very young child. I didn't understand what was going on, but I can imagine what it was like to get lost in the streets and then to be found by the police and ending up in hospital because of fear that he would end up wandering places. So there was a decision that my dad made to enrich his mind. Right? So my grandpa passed on at 73. My dad passed on at 76 with cancer. So you gotta understand, his resolve to stop being, to not stop using his mind was an obsession, literally. That's why he did learn NLP. But one thing that was also an obsession that he started to put into me was when he got diabetes and then later on cancer, is this very intense focus on studying the human biological system, the physiological system. How do we create cortisol? How do we create adrenaline? Right? All of these things that go inside the human body, that's another completely different universe. It's not even neuro-linguistic programming. It's a complete other area of study, neuroscience and physiology. But I get it. I understand it. I know how to manufacture the chemicals inside of my brain and body in order for me to reduce stress, in order for me to feel free, feel good, for me to do my best work. And that it has been leading me through the generations. So what I do hope to be able to do and achieve with this is, I can probably look into the literature. I can also probably look at, certain key questions that come from some of my clients and do some of these videos. But nothing brings me the greatest joy than to talk a little bit about the evolution of your mindset so that you can evolve your business, your career, your relationships. This field that I'm in is giving me the opportunity to study, to learn different models of the world so that I can see the richness and the color of humanity. And it's beautiful. It's just one of those things where, just like a gem that's faceted into different segments, I have now the ability to see the code behind the matrix. I'm no longer caught inside of it, but rather I'm looking at it and being able to achieve my maximum capacity, even though I'm still in progress. So 29 years is not the end. I have many good years ahead, and I'm definitely going to be utilizing it to help elevate people to a level of thinking that transcends what they consider to be suffering. This way, not only can they heal, but they can take massive amounts of actions for greater things for themselves, excellence, being proud of themselves, being self-compassionate, being able to heal the void that's within them by recognizing that life is great wherever it is that you go, and so that they can take actions for ultimate abundance. So if you like this, please click like and subscribe. If you want to stay in tune with additional learnings about NLP, please let me know. All of us will be learning together, and what I want to do is to raise this community beyond a certain level. And of course, if you're interested in taking up an actual immersive certification program, just go to stuarttan.com, sign in for my mailing list, and I'll see you whenever I see you. Take care, and I'll catch you in my next video.